Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Beyond the Album Cover with Jarrell Mason, yours truly, aka Jay Mace, where we get inside the entertainment industry with those in the know and give them their flowers while they're here to be celebrated. Right now with me, I have a legend in the music and television industry. If you listen to music or watch TV within the past 30, 40 years, you've heard this man's productions, his songs on various shows such as NCIS, Oprah, Status Shock. And if you've listened to BBD, Ralph Tresvant, New Kids on the Block, Prince, so on and so forth, then you know this man. And also an author. He has a book called In Tune, which is all about making sure that you stay center with music and how can that translate to being a better you. I'm paraphrasing. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Wolf. Mr. Wolf, welcome to Beyond the Album Cover.
I love that. Beautiful introduction.
Thank you very much. It's 16 years of hard work, but hey, who's counting?
Well, congratulations on hanging in there for 16 years.
Yeah,
That's an accomplishment.
yeah. So I do this on the side of my day gig, but this is all about that passion of music and celebrating those who've made a huge impact musically and just giving them their flowers and a platform to speak their truth. And that's what we try to do here at Beyond the Album Cover.
Sweet, sweet.
Yes, sir. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. So, where were you born and how did your love of music come into play? What was the first 45 you bought? And did you play any instruments before going behind the scenes and doing production?
Okay, that's a five-part question. It's like a
We
Swiss
got we
Army
got
knife.
time. We got time. Switch it
I
up
was
like a Ginsu
born in,
knife.
yeah, I was born in New York, and I was doing music since, I don't know, I was 3 years old. I was writing songs in my head, and I played piano when I was 6. I started to play the piano at 14. I took up guitar. And so, those two instruments were my instruments and still are my instruments. And those are the first two parts. What was the third part? I forgot.
Third part was what was the first record that you remember going down to a record store and buying that made you say, "Hey, I want to get into the business."
Well, I wasn't thinking of the business when I was a little kid. I was just thinking about music, right? So the first record, probably I would say the Kingston Trio. It was a folk group. That probably was it. And then it was another folk group, the Weavers, and then the Beach Boys. I was into the Beach Boys, and then after that, it was Ray Charles. So those are the early influences, the extremely early influences, and also classical music. I was exposed to a lot of classical music. And the thing about living in New York is when you walk on the street, there's just street musicians in my neighborhood and wherever I would go. There was in the subway, there were street musicians playing some of the instruments they played, they made at home, like, and that was very influential. Listening to street musicians was deeply influential.
Now you mentioned the Beach Boys. Can you talk about quickly the influence of Pet Sounds and why it resonates still to this day in the industry, production wise, and why it is pretty much on almost everybody's 500 definitive albums of all time?
The thing about the Beach Boys to me was, people talk about Pet Sounds, and that was very experimental. There were production techniques that Brian Wilson used that hadn't been used before. But for me, the Beach Boys were a couple of things. The harmonies were just out of this world. And this before the Beatles. I mean, the Beatles, their harmonies were very influenced by the Beach Boys. So, their vocal harmonies to me were very striking and just really lovely chord changes, guitar work.
Brian Wilson of Jeans. And it's funny that you mentioned Beach Boys and how their earlier works were very teeny bopper, surfer records. But when Pet Sounds came along, it was almost as if they're saying, we want to ditch that earlier sound, go towards something new. And Brian Wilson probably was studying the Beatles and Sergeant Pepper's and say, hey, I got to make something that's just as good, if not better than Sergeant Pepper.
Yeah, that's probably right. That was around that time, I guess. I was a preteen then anyway. So for me, those songs, those early Beach Boy songs, were meaningful. You know, I was in that demographic of being a little kid. Um, but yeah, I agree with you. There was this loop that the Beatles were influenced by the Beach Boys, and then the Beach Boys were influenced by the Beatles.
And you mentioned growing up in New York. I'm sure your radio dial was tuned into Music Radio 77 WABC with cousin Brucey and everybody that came on WABC, correct?
That was one of them. That was one of the stations. Yeah.
And this was back in the days, people, when AM radio ruled, where at night you could hear WABC further south beyond New York, and they had fans everywhere across the country, pretty much anywhere if you were in any major market, like WLS out of Chicago with John Records Landecker, CKLW out of Windsor, Canada, which Detroit and areas around there heard that. So it was a beautiful time for music and for radio in general, because AM meant you had a larger reach. But for those smaller stations, you had to make sure your signal got shut off by a certain time in order to protect the signal for your big market stations.
All right, that's a lesson in radio history.
Yeah, I know I got my degree in broadcasting, so I know all about AM, FM, and all of that good jazz. So I understand you have a connection with Muscle Shoals. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was a freshman in college at George Washington University, and there was a singer there. And the memory's a little foggy here, how she got to learn one of my songs, but somehow she did. She had a record deal in Muscle Shoals. At that time, Muscle Shoals was like the center of funk in the U.S. in the music business. You had people like Aretha Franklin recording there, Wilson Pickett, and she had a record deal there. And her producer liked the song that I had written. He came up with one of those reel-to-reel tape recorders and went to my dorm room and recorded me singing. And then I had a record deal. Then they signed me to a record deal there.
Mm. And Rick Smith was the owner and the founder of Fame Studios down in Muscle Shoals, correct?
Right. But there were a couple of studios there. He had Fame Studios, and then they had the Muscle Shoals Sound rhythm section that worked there. And then they broke off and started their own studio. And there was another studio, Quinn Ivy. So I was working with the Muscle Shoals people and Quinn Ivy.
Okay.
Not yeah.
All right. Now, with Muscle Shoals and the home of funk, like say the Aretha Franklin and other artists went down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama to get that sound. And then also at the same time, we have Stax out of Memphis. Now, can you give the variations and differences between Muscle Shoals funk and Stax funk that was coming out of Memphis, Volt and all the subsidiary labels in and around Memphis?
That's a tough question. That's a very tough question. I worked with Muscle Shoals people like Wayne Perkins, and I worked with Memphis people like Steve Cropper and Duck Dunn, who are Stax people, as you know. And, the difference, one big thing that they had in common was, of course, their openness to Black music, which at that time was pretty daring down south. It was really very intensely racist. And these musicians were not. And they were very influenced by Black music. So that's something they had in common. And, we used to say in New York, you play a little bit in front of the beat. In LA, they play on the beat. And in the South, they play a little behind the beat, because the South is the quote unquote, the lazy South. And that's part of of funkiness, to be a little bit behind the beat and that kind of funk. I think there's a simplicity to the music of both, but Stax relied, I think, with Steve Cropper on a simpler kind of riffing and horns. Their horns were tremendous, whereas Muscle Shoals was more on the rhythm section, the bass and the drums and the guitar work too. So they have a lot in common, and they had some distinct characteristics because of the people, the different characters that were there too.
And the beautiful thing, once again, about that time period is that while you had Motown taking R&B to the masses in the world, you had Muscle Shoals and Stats bringing that raw, gritty funk, and then also a lot of those indie labels that were popping up. Let's say Mississippi, Georgia, Deep City Records down in Miami, and you had a good variety of funk, no matter what part of the region you were in. And if you had a big regional hit, major labels will do this, knock, 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 and sign you and get your single out to a wider audience.
Yeah, man, you're the master. You know a lot more about this than I do.
Man, I kid you not, I spent years and years reading Jed, Rolling Stones, Spin, watching Video Soul, Soul Train, and just a pure fan and love of all things music and just using this platform to show my passion, express it with people like you.
That's beautiful. That you know this stuff. That's great.
Right. And funny thing about Motown, I went to Salt Lake City a couple years ago. My wife and I, we saw the Motown the musical, and as we were leaving outside, there was this gentleman taking pictures with people, and I recognized him out the corner of my eye. And I told my wife, "That's Lamont Dozier, Holland Dozier, Holland." She was like, "Who?" And I was reading off his stats like it was a basketball card. Like, he did this, 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 this. So I got a chance to see him, ask questions. So that was cool. And then we went to Memphis for a vacation. I got a chance to go see Stax Records and Son, and actually got to see Al Green at his church. And I was trying my hardest not to fanboy the whole time, because I'm like, that man I grew up listening to, and he sounded just as good as the record. And this just goes to show you how much of a tourist attraction that is in Memphis. There was a tour bus of international visitors. They came in for Sunday service. One person tried to slide him a program to sign while going around getting the money in the collection plate. So I found that kind of funny, but I was respectable because, of course, being from North Carolina, you got to be respectable when you enter the house of the Lord, if you know what I'm saying.
Okay.
All right. So you sign the deal, and then Warner Chappelle comes in and you're writing songs. Now, is the process of that when you're writing for a publishing company difficult as far as getting your songs shopped, or is it more of you have somebody that likes what you do and say, hey, whenever you get me some new material, send it to me so I could get first exclusive to see if I have any artists on my label that would like to cut it?
Well, like you're talking about the differences back, decades ago in the record business is now the same thing for publishing. When I signed with Warner Chappell, those publishers, as you said, they were trying to pitch you to other artists. That was the idea. Now it's different. I mean, now from what my understanding is, most publishers rely on the songwriter producers to get their own covers, to get their own productions, and they help with other aspects, financial aspects and other business aspects. But when I was signed to Warner Chappell, I was a staff writer. I worked on movies, Karate Kid, Back to School, Madonna, who's that girl, stuff like that. And then I had records that were made because they pitched my songs to certain artists or record companies.
So, what's your take on the show Songland, where up and coming songwriters pitch their songs to judges, then they go into the studios, rework them, pitch it again for a final product, and then get a placement? Do you think that that's the new wave now? Or does it still rely on that old process of, hey, let's meet up with so and so at this studio, learn the craft, learn the art, and go through those growing pains of not getting placements?
Well, I mean, now you work and you make records right in your bedroom or in your kitchen, wherever it might be, and then you use social media to get noticed. I mean, you don't have to rely anymore whatsoever on the gatekeepers, especially publishers. I mean, they're the last ones in line, really. As far as Songland specifically is concerned, and I know you're asking more generically, but I don't know that. I mean, a very good friend of mine is a producer on that show, and I heard great things about it, but I don't know very much about it. I hear it's got great producers and they do write great songs. That's what I heard, but that's a special, that's I think very special. I have students now who have 60,000 followers, and they're very, very young, and they made their records in their, in their houses or apartments with 20 roommates, and they're doing pretty well
It
on their
can,
own.
yeah, it kind of reminds me of the early days of hip hop where it was do it yourself, the home studio where you had to use what you had, or you maybe borrowed somebody's machine to record this, use the bathroom, shower, or the closet as your vocal booth, use a toilet paper wrapper to give effects and more echo, more reverb. And to think about what Teddy Riley was able to do in the home studio when he recorded those tracks for Guy, Bobby Brown. The list goes on and on. And to think that all of it came from his bedroom at the St. Nicholas Projects in Harlem, and that he will usher in a new sound that we all know and love as New Jack Swing.
Yeah. I didn't realize that Teddy Riley did so much in the home studio.
Yeah, yeah. He was saying, and I believe it was an interview with Red Bull Music Academy, that he was listening to the show that he did for Dougie Fresh and Slick Rick and wanted to add a shaker to it. And I believe he had to do it ingenuously because he didn't have the equipment at the time to get a shaker sound. So you had to be innovative, make lemonade out of lemons. And then Marley Marl said, because I heard the show by Dougie Fresh Slick Rick, I wanted to have a shaker sound for Make the Music with Your Mouth for Biz Marquee. So he said he just went into the microphone and just did to get that shaker like effect for the record. And once again, he did his in a home studio, and it's just amazing to see how they were able to create classics given the technological limitations of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you remember your first production setup?
You mean technically speaking?
Yes, sir. Like as far as, what equipment did you use when you did your first productions? Was it a four
Well,
track, eight track?
it was a 4 track that I did myself, because when Muscle Shoals, they had studios there, right? That we would go into, and in Washington D.C., we'd rent a studio and go in there. In San Francisco, rent the studios. But my own setup was a reel to reel, an AKG 414 microphone, probably a TIAC 4 track reel to reel, and that was it. Maybe I had a UAD compressor, LA4, I think at that time. Was it? We didn't have an LA. I didn't have an LA2A or anything fancy like that. Maybe an LA4, which was cool, and then Mike, and that was it.
So pretty much it was old school bare bones. You make it with what you got, and it came out to be good work. And this was back in the days, folks, where labels had to pay for studio time, and if you didn't have it together, it was going to come out of your advance, or somebody was going to pay for it. And then before everybody started building their own studios, you had to rent time out. And if you really wanted to get a good session in, you would do what was called a blackout, where you would block it out for days at a time or 24 hours, depending on how long you wanted to do it. Because I remember Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis was telling the Donnie Simpson in an interview on Video Soul that the reason why they had built Flight Time in Minneapolis was because that they didn't want to go to any other studios, be able to work freely and not have to worry about rushing because somebody got a session an hour or two after them, and they just wanted to record freely and come and go as they please.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. So do you find that process more conducive where you're able to go into the studio, not have to worry about sessions, and can be able to work at your own pace and not feel like you have to speed up?
Oh man, it's amazing. I mean, today what you can do is just so much better. I mean, we're lucky, we're very, very lucky to live in an era where you can produce music and correct mistakes and on your own. You have the freedom and autonomy. You don't have to rent studio time and rely on other musicians and engineers. It's a fantastic situation in terms of producing music.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And for somebody like Prince, that was a godsend because, as we all know, he was a studio junkie where he ate, slept, and breathed the studio. Susan Rogers, who was his primary engineer, was telling stories of how he kind of always had the mindset of always keep the tapes rolling because you never know when the inspiration will strike. And then band members were saying how we could be done doing a show, maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then he wanted to go do a jam session after that or have a new idea after that. It was like you're on call because you never know when the inspiration would strike with him. And that was just a testament to his genius.
Yeah, and genius has its many times it has its claws, you know, it has its thorns. And I know people in the record business that are similar in terms of their fanaticism for music, and they're very, very successful because they are so passionate about it and so focused on it. But when it ceases to do what it did previously, whether in terms of making you very relevant, like Prince, he was used to at one point, anything he put out, people would listen to. It mattered to people. And eventually, he started to put out music that didn't matter anymore. He mattered. I mean, he could sell out concerts 365 days of the year and make hundreds of millions of dollars, but his records didn't matter anymore, and that he couldn't take. That's really what killed him in the end. And I've seen that, and that's the thing about genius or that passion, that solo focus that music can have. You know, it's important to have balance. It's important to balance that. It's a hard balance because it's that devotion that makes it so good, that makes you so creative. But the other hand, there are musicians that have long-standing careers and still make music, like Herbie Hancock, for instance, and the list goes on and on. Now you have J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar, and they balance their devotion to music with other spiritual or contemplative practices like meditation, for instance.
And it's a tricky slope between creativity and commerce because, as we all know, some labels are more risk averse, where we want an album that's the same as what made us money and give it to us by fourth quarter. Because once Control broke for Janet, A&M wanted her to do a Control Part 2 because it made them money, but she was brave enough to say no. I want to do something different. I want to do a concept album, be socially conscious, and therefore Rhythm Nation was born. And I found it very amazing on A&M's part that they weren't micromanaging and let her, Jimmy, and Terry go off to Minneapolis to record without any label interference. Say, hey, you guys do what you do. Turn us the draft in by this time and the final cut by this time. We're not going to meddle.
Yeah, you're right. That's a problem too, is that people, when they're successful, have some success, their business partners might be their managers, could be their record company. They push them beyond, you know, the point of sustainability, really,
Mhm.
sometimes.
Yeah, and I went back and listened to Janet's first two records before prior to hooking up with Jimmy and Terry. Great albums, very underpromoted. You had production and songs by Leon Silvers, Renee and Angela, and I was like, man, great records. But she really found the sweet spot once she got with Jimmy and Terry because they allowed her to say, hey, what do you want to sing about? What do you want to write about? And let it build organically. And then we saw that formula be successful for her and then successful for New Edition once they hooked up with Jimmy and Terry for the Heartbreak album,
Right.
which I found very dope. And Heartbreak, my favorite album of all time. Now, how did you and Epic hook up?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. So, as you mentioned, I was at Warner Chapel, and there was a woman there, Dana Kasha, who was making tape copies. And she heard that I was looking for an intern, and she called me up and said, you I know you're into hip hop. She said, you're the only one that I know who's into hip hop. At that time, I didn't know anybody else who was into hip hop in LA. Yeah, there was one club. It was called, I think it was called the Radio. and Ice-T was the one act, and he
Mm,
had a crew. He had his crew there, and that was it. That was it. I know Dre and the record wrecking crew were out there too. Um, but in terms of LA, Hollywood area, the one club was the radio. And so anyway, she said, I have a friend. He's 17 years old. He's a DJ. He DJs in the clubs, and he's a hip hop DJ. And he was 17 in high school, and we just hooked up. He was really good at drums. He played drums, and he was really good at DJing. And I had my strengths in terms of guitar and keyboards and my background in songwriting. And we said, hey, let's do this together, even though I was a lot older than he was. Um, and that's what we did. We just started to make music together.
and how is that meshing of when you bring someone into the fold and not overpower, learn the strengths and weaknesses of the other, meld it together so that it can be a smooth, clean, crisp product? Because I know sometimes you can run into that friction when you bring someone in and there's may not be a meshing to where it feels like one is trying to overpower the other with their style and their sense of sensibility.
I don't think that musically speaking, we ever had that problem. I mean, we both had this love for hip hop. At that time in LA, hip hop was very underground. It was nowhere near as popular as it is now. Many radio stations would not play it. In fact, we put out records. We had records where they would take, we had singers for this record, the Barrio Boys, there was a rap inside of it, and they would take the rap out. So we had this love of hip hop, and he did what he could do, and I do what I can do, and we respected each other. There was a real respect for each other's abilities, and again, this love of hip hop is what united us.
And
It's almost like hip hop was at that time was a religion. Because it was so socially and culturally important. We're talking about the Bush era, the first Bush, and the neighborhoods, the urban areas were just being neglected, and people didn't have a voice. And the hip hop gave people a voice that didn't have a voice,
yeah,
and
it
we were very
most definitely
passionate.
did. Yeah, it most definitely did. And you mentioned how mainstream radio wouldn't even touch rap because raps were edited out of singles back in the day. If you notice on cassettes, they would have radio edit without rap and with rap. And then if you were in New York, you had Mr. Magic's Rap Attack on WBLS, DJ Red Alert, Chuck Chill Out on 98.7 Kiss. Then out in LA, you had a little teeny tiny AM station, 1580 Stereo KDAY. Be sure to go to YouTube to check out my throwback interview with Mr. Greg Mack of the Greg Mack
Greg
Attack.
Mack, Greg Mack. There you go. He was
Mm-hmm.
the one DJ, right? The one radio DJ in LA.
And I found that quite interesting because, like BLS and Kiss on the East Coast, they parted rap music where it only got played on the weekends or late Friday nights, so it wouldn't affect the diaries or the books. But K Day played it all day, every day. And the one thing I noticed about West Coast hip hop during that time, pre NWA, Dr. Dre, and Snoop, it was very high energy dance, kind of sort of like with Egyptian Lover, LA Dream Team, World Class Wrecking Crew, and Captain Rap. I want to say that was one of the first records that Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis did out in LA. I believe Captain Rap, Hard Times, I Just Can't Stand It, I believe was the name of the record.
Epic and I did work with Craig Mack, and we did a record with him, with Greg Mack. And in New York, they had, besides the radio station that you're talking about, when I would go to New York, I would watch Manhattan Cable, and they had shows on there, and I can't remember some of the names. There was one, I think it was Goldie something. They had these shows, and they play rap like Rob Bass,
Mm-hmm.
It Takes Two. and Dougie Fresh, and you'd see these videos that were very, very, very bare bones videos that these rappers were making on Manhattan cable, like 2 in the morning, and these underground shows. There were a couple of them, and I used to love that. I used to love when I was in New York. I just stay up watching these rap videos.
Yep, the days of public access. And I got to give big mention to Uncle Ralph McDaniels and Video Music Box. Also, go to YouTube and where you can find Beyond the Album Cover podcast to listen to my throwback interview with Mr. Lionel C. Martin.
Wow, the video director.
Yes, Mr. Lionel Martin, aka the Vid Kid. I believe he directed the remix video for BBD's Do Me, I believe.
He did. He directed a lot of stuff. He did Laquan. He did the Belle DeVoe. Yep. He did a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And then also too, at this same time, you had other regions of the country that had their own video shows, and you got to see that rap wasn't monolithic. It was different from what was going on in LA or New York or Houston or Miami or Cleveland. Everybody had their own sound and their own unique flavor. And then if you would go up hours north to Oakland in the Bay Area, you had Hammer, you had Too Short, E40, and then you had the Soul Beat Network, which was founded by, I believe, Chuck Johnson in 1979. It pretty much showcased the whole African American experience in Oakland. And we know Oakland has a great tradition of bands from Sly and the Family Stone, Graham Central Station, Sheila E., Tony, Santana. The list goes on, and all of the great funk bands that come out of the Bay Area.
True.
Now, tell me about the first time you hooked up with New Edition and realizing that these guys were something special, because we see them now as our generation's Temptations, and they gotten their flowers many times over and appreciated more so by the mainstream, in my opinion, because of the BET miniseries that came out in January of 2017.
Well, Epic knew the brothers of Ronnie DeVoe, and New Edition was already legendary when I hooked up with them, and Epic was friendly with them, and through the twins, he was friendly with Ron, and Ron brought Rick over and Mike to our studio, to my studio, and they just loved what we were doing because we sampled each other. At that time, hip hop was totally based on sampling. Nobody was doing anything live. So I would play guitar live and some bass or hire Reggie McBride, who was Stevie Wonder's bass player, and keyboards, and Epic would play the drums, and we'd sample each other. So we were using original samples. It was like somewhere between live and sampling, and they loved that because they grew up with the Jackson 5 when you had real instruments, but it was hip hop because we were sampling, and we just hit it off and started to work together. But they were already legendary in terms of parts of New Edition. They weren't respected as solo artists. Bobby Brown was huge, Ralph Tresvant was huge, and then Johnny Gill. They weren't respected yet, but they were, as part of New Edition, they were already very, very well esteemed and successful.
Right. So talk about the process of going into the studio with them in the Poison album and saying, we're going to take you guys, give you your own sound and blueprint that's totally different from New Edition. Because listening to interviews with the three of them, they were saying how they were listening to hip hop real heavy, but couldn't really go full throttle because of the New Edition brand being class, the choreography slick, a la Temptations, Whispers, Blue Magic, the Shy Lights, so on and so forth.
Yeah, it was their vision. Hip hop smoothed out on the R&B tip with a pop feel appeal to it. They had that vision, which hadn't happened yet, of combining hip hop with R&B and crossing it over into pop. There was nobody who did that successfully. Guy incorporated R&B and hip hop elements, but they didn't cross over pop. They stayed in the R&B. It was the Poison album, the vision of those three, Belle Biv DeVoe, that that made possible the hip hop that exists today, which is a crossover of hip hop, R&B, and pop. And they hired the producers that shared that vision. And we certainly shared that vision with them and helped them realize that vision.
It's crazy to see how Poison is still an impactful record 30 years later. Busta Rhymes just recently sampled Poison for Out of My Mind off his Hot album, ELE 2. So it just goes to
Yeah.
show you it is still a banger. You can still play Poison in the club. People will still dance to it.
Yeah, you're right. That's pretty cool. The Busta Rhymes record. Yeah.
Now, with the Word to the Mother record, did you guys know that it was going to feature all six, or was originally just a BBD track and then later decided to get Bobby, Ralph, and Johnny on it?
Well, it was based on a track that was on the Poison album. And they came and they said, look, we want to do a remix of that track. And we want to have everybody from New Edition on it. And so that was our intent, that the remix would be Word to the Mother would be a New Edition reunion of sorts, which it was. It was a great experience. Everybody was there. Bobby and Ralph and Johnny and Belle Biv DeVoe, and everybody was there. And it was great. It was really heartwarming, and everybody was very uplifted by it.
Right, because I remember seeing the 1990 MTV Video Music Awards performance where everybody did their solo cuts, and then at the end they did a New Edition medley, and just thinking how that was amazing to see everybody white hot at the top of their game, and to see all six come out in the suits with the square in the arm sleeve and the choreography, and I'm like, man, these guys, it enough cannot be said about New Edition. They're my favorite group of all time. And I just told Brooke, I was just amazed to see that performance and to see all six on stage at their peak when everybody was on the top of their game solo wise.
Nice.
Yeah. Because what group can you know of where everybody branch off solely, have success, come back together as a group, have more success with the Home Again album, still be loved, celebrated, and revered 40 plus years later, and set the standard for every boy band to follow? And that leads me to my next question. Talk about you and Epic's work on New Kids Face the Music album, which I felt was criminally underrated.
Again, it was, I love those guys. Especially got closer to Donnie and Jordan Knight. Very talented, very serious about the music. And it was a joy to work with them. Nothing but respect, mutual respect.
Mm.
They were very humble, especially for, every time they'd come to the studio, they'd be followed by cars full of fans, usually young women, and then they come in the studio and just be very humble and listen to you and listen to your suggestions. They were easy to work with.
Yeah, I had a chance to interview Danny. It was about a year prior to New Kids reforming. We were talking about the Face the Music album, and I got the sense from him that it was an album that they really wanted to do all along, even during the Hanging Tough Step by Step period. But when the whole pop phenomenon hit, you had to go with the pop feel because that's your demographic. But New Kids to me were R&B at the core. There's a video of them performing at a club in Boston. They were wearing Jordan tracksuits. It was for WILD 1090 AM out of Boston. And I had to tell people, I'm like, hey, they earned it the hard way. Performing in small clubs, doing shows with rap and R&B acts. They even did a version of Please Don't Go Girl that only got airplay on BET. But once the whole pop thing exploded, that was when everything shifted. But New Kids were hip hop and R&B at the core, especially all five of them.
Very true. Donnie's responsible for, he's one of the most significant people responsible for Dre and the Chronic getting signed to Interscope.
Oh, really?
Donnie. Oh, yeah. Donnie told Jimmy Iovine, Donnie had his brother Marky. Marky Mark and the Good Vibrations. So Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch saved Interscope from bankruptcy, pretty much. And Donnie had a production deal there. He was the hip hop guru at Interscope, and Dre and Suge Knight come along trying to get a record deal. Nobody will give him a record deal. They're afraid of gangster rap. And Jimmy hears the record. He knows he doesn't really understand hip hop. So what does he do? He asks a few people. One of the people he asks is his hip hop producer, who he has a deal with, Donnie. And Donnie tells him, "You got to sign Dre. You're crazy if you don't sign Dre." And I saw Dre at a club come up to Donnie and thank him profusely for helping him get his record deal.
Wow, that's what we do here at Beyond the Album Cover. We give exclusives. I never knew that Donnie Wahlberg played a role in Dr. Dre getting his deal with Interscope. Now, around this time, Chronic drops. Snoop was on deep cover, Nothing But a G Thing, and that set Snoop up for Doggy Style to come out the following year. And we just have a massive explosion of rap into the mainstream. And of course, MC Hammer 2 years prior, 2 or 3 years prior, excuse me, with Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em, did pop numbers. And people need to understand and respect Hammer for what he did, not only for rap, but for the music biz in general. And he made Capital a lot of this.
Okay.
A lot of money. So talk to me a little bit about the impact of Hammer and what he was able to do in the business with the units he was moving.
Well, I don't have any relationship to Hammer really, so I don't know too much about. I don't have any thought. I can't help you with that because I didn't work with him, and I have no thoughts about him really.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, what was the production process like for Keeping My Fingers Crossed on the Face the Music album? And I believe
Wow,
Joey was singing lead on that, correct?
I don't remember. Joey was the lead on that. I
I,
mean,
I
I
think
remember
so. Don't quote.
Jordan Knight.
Jordan was
I
lead.
think I think Jordan did the most. What I remember is Jordan doing the heavy lifting on that. I think they all had a part. Everybody had a part to play, but my memory is that Jordan did most of the verses and Joey did a verse. But I remember working more with Jordan on those verses. And you
Mm.
had everybody on the hook. Um, yeah, so I think Jordan did more, but they all played a part.
Yeah, dope record, dope album. And you mentioned Barrio Boys earlier. Barrio Boys, to me, very underrated group. The How We Roll album, dope album. And they had the privilege and the honor of doing a track with the late Selena before she passed. And I felt that Barrio Boys should have been bigger here in the US. I felt that they came too early, right before the Latin explosion took off here in the States.
Wow, you're amazing. How you know all these records and that you like these records. That's amazing.
Yeah, and
That's
Barrio
amazing.
Boys, they were put together by Joe Jacket, who was a part of New Kids on the Blocks camp. And
Right.
he talked to Maurice and said, "Hey, I want to put together a group that can do what New Kids are doing, but do it in Spanish." And that's where Barrio Boys came in. And
Right.
also on that album, production was done by Full Force, who I felt laid the groundwork for what was to come with New Jack Swing, with Teddy and everybody to come after. But everybody in the mainstream industry knows them from House Party, and then they hit Pop Pay Dirt once All I Had to Give for Backstreet Boys became a smash hit.
All right. Well, when I write my memoir, I'm going to have to call you up first because you know more than I do about what the records I worked on.
Man, I'm truly flattered, truly humbled, by that compliment. Like I've been stating, it's all about just sharing the love and the knowledge for the music. Now, I noticed some of the plaques that you get in the back of us. I see one of them is BBD's Poison. Now, what are the other plaques that are behind the wall? And this is for those who are listening to the audio version of this interview. Mr. Wolf has plaques on plaques on plaques.
Well, all the people you mentioned, Barrio Boys, uh, in Latin America, Platinum, and Velvet DeVoe and Ralph Tresvant. So all the people you mentioned.
Now, Ralph's debut album, I loved. Top to bottom, I loved it. And it was just great just to see, like I said, all six members shining at the same time. And then who would have thunk that Michael Bivins would take his A&R talent and discover four young men out of Philadelphia that would change the face of the music industry, and that's Boys to Men. And they were the inspiration, along with New Kids, for the infamous Luke Pearlman to put together Backstreet Boys.
Yep. True.
Right. Definitely that. And then also, fun fact, people, Bobby Ross Avila was the opening act on the Magic Summer Tour for New Kids.
Okay.
Yeah, who I thought was really dope, really talented. And then once Johnny Wright saw what Maurice was doing, of course, he started working with Backstreet, and then later on NSYNC. And I just found it to be so cool to where what was once old is considered new, especially what we're seeing now with the whole K-pop movement, with BTS and all of the acts that are coming out. And I felt like the whole K-pop movement is like early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s teen pop on steroids, because K-pop is a whole nother monster.
Yeah.
So how did you end up hooking up, going over on the TV side, composing scores? And is there a difference when on that side of the fence as opposed to being in a studio and producing records?
Well, at the end of the 90s, a couple of things were happening. I could see that the internet was coming along and that it was about to destroy the record business. I saw that. I went to a conference in 97 in England, excuse me, about the future of digital distribution. And that was when the internet just started. You had dial-up. You had to sit there and wait an hour to get one song. But at this conference, somebody from Tower Records stood up and he said, "We're doomed." And when he said that, I said, okay, the guy from Tower Records, which is so successful, it's like Amazon.com today for the record industry, is saying we're doomed. I better look into this. That was one thing. And also the influence of NWA on rap and everything was, I wasn't feeling comfortable. And so I made a conscious decision to go into TV music. I already had been working in film music and I liked it very much. And I thought it would be a good transition also as a family man to get into the TV side. And I saw that there was nobody who could do hip hop with any legitimacy that was interested in getting in TV music. I mean, if you could do hip hop, it was one of two things. You were trying to get a record deal and you were putting out your own independent records, or you were trying to get a record deal, or you had a record deal. Nobody cared about TV music. So I made records just like I always did, except my customers weren't Warner Brothers Records or Sony Records. The clientele was Warner Brothers Pictures or Sony Television. And so at 1998, I formed the Producers Lab. And as you know, we're in hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of television episodes. And the philosophy was to make records for TV. It wasn't any lower quality. It was the highest quality you could do for television. And there wasn't a big demand for it at first. It was very sort of segregated, but eventually there was more and more demand for it. And we hit a nice sweet spot for about 7 years until the record business did implode and people were fleeing the record business to get into TV music. So, and then there is the scoring aspect, which is very different, because scoring, like with Static Shock, for instance, or other things, you are the artist. The composer is the artist. You're no longer creating music and featuring a singer or a rapper. It's like, it's just the instrumental. and pretty much you, the composer or the artist. So it's very different in that sense. And there are a lot of similarities. I always wanted to have the hip hop influence if I could in the scoring. Sometimes I couldn't. Sometimes it was electronic, which I also loved, like for NCIS. But it was either electronic or hip hop influences in the instrumentals.
So now when you're scoring, are you able to see the scenes ahead of time so you kind of sort of know this is the way that I want to go with this scene, or you're going off of feel when you get the script and then hoping that the product turns out good before it comes out on air?
It really depends on the project. I would say the overwhelming majority of the projects we do today are creating instrumental music for things like football games, the NFL, or sports games. Maybe it's reality shows where you're just creating instrumentals that people will use as far as instrumentals are concerned. Again, nothing has changed as far as the philosophy of cutting great R&B and hip hop records and licensing those to television shows. So that has not changed in terms of that philosophy.
Yeah, and I found it funny that you were mentioning how somebody from Tower Records said we're doomed once the internet was coming, and then Napster and Kazaa, LimeShare, Bear Morpheus, all of the MP3 file sharing sites. I had a chance to interview Steve Greenberg, who was A&R at Mercury, founder of S Curve, and we were talking about that. And I could kind of sense that it felt like the industry was eating high off the hog, so to speak. We're making all this money charging customers almost $20 for a CD or 15, $16 for a tape. Who's going to want to sit down in front of 56K dial-up internet and download a record? But little did they know that people were willing to do that. And I kind of think from the outside looking in, it was their hubris that kind of led to the decline of the music industry, where people are not going to go to HMV, Camelot, Tower, Virgin Megastore, insert local mom and pop record store here, and go buy a cassette or a CD.
Yeah, you have an incredible grasp of history and the landscape and the perspective. You're right. There was hubris, there was fear, arrogance in the record business, which was one of the reasons I was happy to leave it. You put your finger on that correctly, I think.
So how do you maintain like being true to yourself? Whereas in the industry, of course, there's some people that's you're one way one minute, another way the next, and it's all about getting in good with somebody. And if you're not willing to make certain concessions, then it could be a long haul, because it seems like it is a majority from the outside looking in relationship oriented business.
Well, I think for a lot of situations, it's relationship oriented. I mean, if you want to get a book published and you have a literary agent, that literary agent will have their friends at different publishing companies. That's another industry that I've learned about, right? Because I have a book, so I saw the connections between you talking about relationships. Well, the same thing that holds true in the record business holds true in the book publishing business. Now, you do have different dimensions, as we mentioned before, because of social media. I think artists have a lot more leverage than they did before. And if you're an artist and you're getting a lot of followers and a lot of streaming on Spotify, then you go to a major label, and they can blow you up. But all the major labels will come after you. I mean, it's a different dynamic. So you're not dependent totally on having certain relationships with the record business now.
It feels like we're back to the days of mom and pop indie labels are out in LA, like when Easy E and Ice Cube prior to NWA, when they were in CIA, they would sell records out of the trunk, go down to Macola, the pressing plant, get those records pressed, pop them out the trunk. Same thing what Hammer and Too Short was doing. Pop it out the trunk, sell your units, and if you make enough noise, the majors will come to you. It feels like we're reverting back to that now with the internet and how it completely cut out the middleman.
Yeah, good point.
Mhm,
Fair point.
yeah, and that's what it's all about: getting your streams, getting your followers, getting your impressions up, so that way you can have a buzz. Now, with your book In Tune, how did that come about? And explain the connection between music, meditation, and Zen, and how it all is one and the same.
Well, yeah, we talked about leaving the record business and getting into TV. So I thought TV would be less stressful, but it was a lot more stressful. And I had a panic attack. And when I went to the therapist, he prescribed meditation to me. And I had been trying to meditate my whole life, but now I felt better. I better do this because I don't want to have these panic attacks. And I was able to overcome a lot of the issues that led to anxiety and panic because of meditation. And when that happened, I saw the connection between music in terms of in music, you have to focus on what you're doing. And you have to, we talked about this before, that you're totally immersed in what you're doing, you're concentrating. And as a musician, you practice. You know, you sit down and you make mistakes in playing the song. You don't beat yourself up and say, I can't do this. You just persevere and you keep going till you get it right. And I was able to do that in music and meditation. If my mind got distracted, I would beat myself up. Well, I made the connection with music and say, wait, your mind will get distracted. Don't beat yourself up. It's just like making a mistake on the piano and the guitar. You just play it again. And when I made that connection, I was able to successfully have a practice, a meditation practice. And when I saw these connections, I said, you know what? Everybody who's a musician should know this. You should know that you already know how to do this other practice because you're a musician. You can take these abilities that you have in music and use them in mindfulness and in meditation practice. And then now extends to people that are serious about listening to music. Because when you listen to music, you're totally focused, you're concentrated, your mind, body, feeling are all going in one direction. That doesn't happen very often in life. But it happens when you're immersed in music and it happens when you're immersed in meditation. And
Mhm.
so when I saw this, I started to write a book. It took me about 7, 8 years to finish the book. From the time I started it, I think I started in 2007 and it was released in 2019. And so it took a very, very long time to write it. It took, I think, a couple of years after I was signed, had a publishing deal to actually put it out. So it was a long, long process of writing the book.
So now, when you sign your publishing deal, was it where you had to turn in a lot of drafts before the final copy? And it's almost kind of like the same thing when pitching a record, and you're bringing revisions before you get that final copy in to go to press.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know how you know this, but you're right. I had, in my case, I think a lot of people's case, unless you're Stephen King or John Bolton or somebody's going to, or Michelle Obama, you have a lot of different drafts. I had 6 different drafts. You're right about that. And that's what took a long time. I think there was more than a year of just revising stuff. Writing a book is much, much harder than making records, in my opinion. It's much, much harder if you're on your own and you can't, there are no lucky accidents like there are in the studio. You know, you can have a lucky accident making a record. You can't have a lucky accident writing a book. It all comes from nothing, from nowhere. Where in the studio, you have all these toys you can play with that'll generate some music and you can put some words together. But the book is much, much harder.
Yeah, I've never heard of a one book wonder with an author, and it's definitely a skill to constantly, consistently crank out bestsellers year in, year out, and still be beloved enough to where if you put out a book that's decades old, people will still want to go ahead and read it. And I find that much more difficult than, consistently, constantly cranking out hits, because a book is no joke.
Yeah, that's true.
So, how did you end up on the staff at USC? Go Trojans!
Well, I always was interested in education, and I started to MC panels there about music and film and television. I guess it was in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, or the aughts as they call it. And I was just, putting together panels for them to talk about music and different media, not only film and television, but video games, etc. And then they said, well, why don't you teach that? And so I started to teach it officially in 2015. And part of that course of music and media and culture was to teach about mindfulness. That was part of the course. So then they approached me and said, you know, the students really like the part about the mindfulness. You should just teach that as well as a separate course. It was Ken Lopez, who was chair of the department there. And so I started to do that. And, uh, and, and I love it. It's great to learn from, you know, these young college students and to share what I know.
And how long you been on the staff at USC for?
Since 2015, so 5 years.
Okay. And you mentioned video game music and how I believe video game music is some of the highly most underrated music that's out there because they were taking their cues. A lot of like early 90s games were looking at what was going on mainstream wise and let's incorporate it in our games because there was the fight select screen in King of Fighters 94 where they pretty much blatantly just looped the drums from the Jane Child Don't Want to Fall in Love remix, which was produced by Teddy Riley. And I just found it amazing how a lot of those gaming companies like Sega, SNK, they were taking what was going on in the New Jack Swing or hip hop at the time and just basically just putting it on a Sega or a Super NES game.
I don't know too much. I would bring in people from different areas
Mm,
of culture.
mm.
I don't know that much about video games, but as guests of mine, I would have people that were experts come in and talk about it.
Right. And what was your thoughts on when Epic was doing Crazy Town and Butterfly became a huge breakout hit and it was featured in the movie Sing a couple of years ago?
Oh, that record was everywhere. I would be working out in the gym and the record would come on. You know, Epic and I are still very close, and was very happy to see Epic have success. I think he's incredibly talented, a great person, and I'm very proud of anything that Epic does. And that record was everywhere. You couldn't escape it.
It was game busters. You couldn't get away from it. And with music, mindfulness, and meditation, about how everything is interconnected, I think about how, for me, I listen to music not only as an escape, but for me, it's a focus point to where I can be able to focus more on the day job. And I feel a lot more productive because I'm still, I'm calm, I'm like water to where when things are going all around me, I can just be still, have those ripples go off my back, and continue to be focused and full of my center self. And the thing I find ironic about this whole thing is that when I listen to the Broken Record podcast with Rick Rubin and see him now about how he's a big proponent, of meditation, of Zen, and of being in centerfulness and mindfulness. And it was complete polar opposite of what most of us know Rick Rubin of in the early days of Def Jam and with the Beastie Boys.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Well, my podcast is about music and mindfulness and meditation, and that's the main, and mental health in the music industry. And so we interview people that are involved one way or another in either meditation, mindfulness, or and music. People that are connected, who work in the music industry, to meditation and mindfulness and other contemplative practices. And sometimes we'll have experts in mindfulness. We have neuroscientists coming in and the head of mindfulness research at UCLA and USC, and people like Krishna Das, who's an internationally celebrated chant leader who was nominated for the Grammy and performed on the Grammys, music supervisors of famous shows who practice meditation, people that managers like Danny Goldberg, who managed Nirvana and ran various record companies, who has a meditation practice and talked about his spiritual practices. So, that's our focus, is the connections between music and spiritual practices and mindfulness and mental health. In the music industry, we have a mental health crisis in this whole country because of a lot of different reasons, and especially with the pandemic. But in the music business, it's very accentuated, and so we focus on that as well.
Right. And I found very interesting the episode that you did with, I believe she was the head of Music Cares, and just saying how they provide outlets and resources for musicians or people within the industry that maybe are having a difficult time right now, because I know it's extremely difficult since no touring, no performance, and some are like, how am I going to make it week to week or month to month for daily expenses when I can't do what it is that I am gifted at doing.
Right. Absolutely right. It's always there, whether even when things are well, being an artist in the music is such a precarious life. You're dependent on the whims of the audience. You're sensitive to begin with. To be an artist, you have to be vulnerable to your feelings and to other people's feelings. So, you're starting out with issues already that deal with your emotional balance. And then to put on top of that, the financial pressures that are specific to COVID and then are always there, just makes it very challenging to maintain sanity while working in music.
And how do you maintain your sanity in the industry where it's you're constantly ripping and running, you're living out of a suitcase or out of a studio, city to city, town to town, and you really don't have time to decompress, process, and breathe because I got to go to this photo shoot, I got to go to this interview, I got to go do this meet and greet, I got to go perform at this venue, and it's pretty much it's like Bill Murray and Groundhog Day.
It's a challenge. That's what we're working on. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Right. And I think that is a great thing, saying that it's no longer taboo to talk about mental health and how it is important to where you tell somebody that you're not okay. Say, I need to step away. I need to take a break. It's getting too much. But I think the drawback now with the internet is that you got to constantly stay in people's faces because it's so by the second. Where if you take a long lull, if you're the rare few like a Jay-Z, Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar, or Sade, where you can go for years in between putting out records, the average artist, or especially the newer artists, can't afford that luxury because it's so come and go, quick, 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 quick.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a problem, those pressures, and it's important for artists to see perspective and to understand that there's more to their lives than their bodies, their minds, and their careers. And to be aware of things that are larger than just, their role as an artist, that they have purpose which is much greater, and to put that into perspective and to have them get in touch with their humanity, their essential humanity, and their incredible powers of awareness. And and to learn mental training, to get certain skills that you can put things into perspective, that you can step, like you said, step back, that you can have critical distance between what is happening and how you're going to interpret what is happening and how you're going to respond to what is happening. And
Mm-hmm.
that way they can build a kind of an equilibrium, a kind of a balance that can help them stay steady through the ups and downs. So there are skills that you can learn. There's training that you can do. And by the way, it's like physical training, like exercise. That's good too. I mean, physical training is important in terms of keeping your mental health, your physical health. And so there are these tools, and you mentioned Music Cares, and Music Cares is involved in many of them, but they're available to anybody from multiple places, to help you navigate the the dangers and the challenges of being in the world as a musician or in the music industry at large.
Definitely make sure you have yourself all together. And when you know that you're not okay, it's okay to say, I'm not okay. I need to step away. Go do whatever it is you need to do to recharge your batteries, reset, be your best self, your full self. Because if you're not, as I've interviewed people over the years talking about the business, it is a business that'll chew you up, spit you out, treat you like yesterday's news if you let it.
Yeah, it's a good point. You're saying if you're not okay to seek help, and therapy doesn't have the stigma. Those are good points, and very helpful.
And you can also get the book that will help you out as well. And it's available on Amazon, wherever you get your books. And it's also an e-copy form. It's a good read. I highly recommend. Listen to the podcast, which is available on most streaming platforms. And you can be in tune with yourself. Listen to some good old conversation and just be your full self and be productive throughout your day. And do you have any shout outs you want to give before we conclude this interview? And also plug social media if you have any.
Well, the social media is Wolf and Tune on Instagram. And I think we're on Twitter too. And we have a Facebook page. It's Wolf and Tune. The book is, as you know, In Tune. Music, as a matter of fact, I happen to have a copy.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Plug it. Plug away. Plug away. There it is. You can get it.
Bridge to mindfulness.
There it is.
Thank you very much.
You can get it everywhere.
Oh, get it Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and the bookstores when they were open. A lot of the bookshops have it. Wolf and Tune is the podcast. And thank you very much, Mr. Mason, for this incredible lesson that I've learned in the history that I was more or less involved with. And like I said, when I write my memoir, the first thing I'm going to do is check with you and make sure I got my facts correct.
Man, no, thank you for taking the time to do this interview. You can catch this interview on all streaming platforms. Just search Beyond the Album Cover, Anchor Breaker, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify. Video content is available on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/J85. Subscribe, like, follow, tell a friend. And also facebook.com/Beyond the Album Cover is where you can get updated with all things related to the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, author, composer, producer, remixer, songwriter, teacher, overall great human being, Mr. Richard Wolf. Thank you so very much for coming on to the podcast and doing this interview.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.